Hello. This week's lecture is going to be different. I want to talk to you about art history. But this is not purely a lecture about art, but rather, unlike art historians, and that's a separate field of study that is about interpreting paintings within the context of the wider art world, this is a history class, an unhyphenated history class, not an art history class. So we're dipping into art history to learn how to read pictures and other artworks so that we can use them as sources that serve us as evidence to make a case about the entirety of history, not just the history of art, but that can serve us as sources in the same way that the texts, the original texts that I've been assigning to you do. And just like there are rules for how to read a text so that it can serve us as evidence in making a case about what happened in history and why, the same is true of works of art as well. So for the purpose of the class, you're going to be writing a paper where you interpret a painting and compare it, which is the preliminary, the first step in making a painting usable as a source for a historical argument. So I'll be exercising that in this lecture. I'll show you, as it were, I'll show you how it is done, and then you can do it your own self. Obviously, you'll be doing less of this in the paper. I'm going to cover more ground than I expect you to cover. But first, a couple of remarks about the relationship between images and the nation. Any nation is an imaginary construct, as we learn from Benedict Anderson's book from the 1970s, Imagine Communities. You can't feel, touch, taste a nation. It is always the product of the imagination, because you have to supply through your mind a connection with people and places and ideas and institutions that isn't tangible to you. Not in the same way that an actual community of people you live with in your neighborhood, for instance, is tangible. And one important way of creating this sense of community across space and time is through visual representation. Yes, the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence and the Gettysburg Address are important, symbolic, almost sacred texts for establishing national identity. But their power pales by comparison with images, with pictures that speak straight to the heart and get to the brain that way. So this is why art has always been the preferred venue, as well as literature, architecture, and so forth, music, not to forget, for nationalists who want to get to the brains of people, to convince them that their nation is a project worth fighting for, worth building in the first place, like the German nation, for instance, is so important in developing the language of nationalism, because there wasn't a German nation state up until 1871, and a nationalist movement competed with other political currents, liberalism, socialism, traditional legitimatist conservatism that wants monarchy to rule. Nationalism was one part of the bigger political spectrum that just happened to be very successful because it used art so effectively to make its case. And so in the same way that the German nation was pre-imagined in art and monuments and so forth before it was made into a state, America also is constituted through the imagery. In Washington, the man, the founding father, the father of the nation, the leader of the Continental Army, whose military success was important in making independence happen, plays an outsized role, to the point where the capital city of the country, seen here in this photograph, is named after the man. It is called Washington, D.C. D.C. stands for District of Columbia, as I'm sure you know. An exterritorial part of the United States, in the sense that the citizens don't live in a state. They don't have a governor. They get governed by Congress, and they are not represented in Congress. Interestingly enough, the license plates of the District of Columbia read taxation without representation. Anyway, so what you see here is one example of how Washington, the name of the man, becomes an important point of identification for what America is about. And there's two Washingtons in this photograph. You have that obelisk. An obelisk is this classical geometrical shape with the square tapered base and the pyramid on top. And that is the Washington Monument. Now, if you are in Washington, if you've ever been there, you'll notice that this is a very, very large space. If you walk the distance from the Washington Monument to the Capitol building here, you've covered about half the length of this big, big, long space, the National Mall, that connects all the important parts that are at the heart of the city of Washington. And of course, the reason that this is set up in this fashion is because Washington, the city, was built from scratch. There was nothing there, it was swampland. So the Republic built itself, the city, as its capital. It was built with the purpose in mind, to be the seat of government, the seat of the power of the sovereign people from scratch, and then used the very layout of the streets and the placement and the design of the buildings to make a political statement through the use of architecture, another form of art, what this country is about. So, what is the center in the cityscape of Washington, D.C.? This building here, the Capitol. If you look at the map from up top, you will see there's a circle road around it. All the streets radiate like the rays of a star from this central seat of power. And who resides in the Capitol building? Congress. The two houses, the Senate and the House of Representatives. Each has one wing of the building to itself, and a huge shared space in the middle, a large room on the ground floor under this dome, under this cupola. Congress is the representative of the people. The people are sovereign, not the king, in a republic. So where is the government? In the White House. That is where the president sits. The White House, if you were standing at the base of the Washington Monument here, would be over that way to the left. A little set apart from this main stretch that represents the power of the republic and of the people. So by design, the chief executive of the business is de-emphasized. He has a nice house, a decent sized mansion for sure, but you could fit that into any of the buildings that line the National Mall several times over. It is designed to be comparatively modest. It is not like in a monarchy in Versailles, for instance, where the kings of France reside, where the centerpiece of it all is the palace where the king lives. And that's that. There are no representatives of the people. So the majesty of sovereignty that is emphasized by having the wide open space designed for no other purpose than to give people a good look from far away at the power and at the splendor of the power at the center of it. That spot is reserved to the representatives of the people and not to the king. Now, another instance of where Washington symbolizes the nation is, of course, in this painting of Washington crossing the Delaware. if this were a live class, I would ask who's seen this painting before. And in the past, most students had seen it, even those who were not born and raised in this country. It is global in its ability to represent the United States in a snapshot. You see this, you immediately think George Washington, and you're thinking, he's crossing the Delaware. Why is he crossing the Delaware? Yes, to get to the other side. And that's probably the extent of what people know about it, but they do associate it with the War of Independence. So in this way, that this painting, you see the painting and you immediately make the connection. Ah, this is Washington. This represents America. America stands for liberty and freedom and self-government. This chain of association that is triggered by the painting is what makes it iconic. Now, an icon is something that if you have a smartphone, you'll be familiar with. It's a little F, white F, lowercase on a blue background. And you know, if you tap on that, it'll take you to Facebook. It doesn't have to spell that out because you know, you've learned that. If you have any image then that conveys a more complex, broader meaning at a glance, what you have is an icon. And so in this way, this painting is functioning as an icon. One of the ways, other than public education, like the fact that you have this painting in your school books, or if you have very patriotic art teachers, you might have been forced to paint it on a wall in your school with more or less success. Another way, when you come to icons, that they're kept alive and meaningful is through parody, through popular culture, through being quoted and cited. There was only recently, there was a TV commercial. There's always TV commercials every couple of years that cite Washington crossing the Delaware, and I don't remember whether this was for Geico or whatever, but it was George Washington crossing a busy street, a busy highway in Delaware to get to the other side, and everybody honks and is annoyed at him. So I want to show you one example for where somebody is paying homage through making fun, mildly, of the picture, but yet it is a very patriotic nod to this picture. So that'll be the next part.